Hello everybody and welcome back to Army Painting Series 17. This is episode 2, long-awaited one, back to the Splintered Fang, but we've got something we did not have before. These are you saw the episode, it was last week, put this up where I was making essentially my homemade oil brushers here. So same jars with their labels, lots of fun. And since then, I've actually had a chance to crash test these guys. Now I'll show you. This is about as close as I could get to some of the Splintered Fang miniatures right here, as far as something that was different. And I wanted to see, could I just basically paint one figure all in one go? And I learned some very important things. Now, I want to say, first of all, I believe this is basically bone dry. This is almost. The other one was almost bone dry, but this one here, now this has a bunch of layers of paint on it. But this one over here that just has 1 or 2 layers, this is already bone dry here. So it's got the same, what would you say, the same drying time as something like a MIG ammo oil brusher. Other thing I'm real pleased to see is that it's not shiny at all. And even this, which is it's still a little bit wet in some places. Look at that, you're not really seeing much of a shine on that baby at all by comparison. Because if you remember what were they, the 8K Interactive Optilungs, it was like I was painting with gloss. So this is massive right here, really amazing. And again, that was the oil brushers. I may have to call them something else, but you get the drift there. Now this is another thing that's different. So you can see how that's all super glossy. Actually, that's less glossy. That's after I sprayed it twice with Dull Coat. But you see how dark that was. That's an awful lot like, when we take actually what this is I did that pre-wash like you've seen me do in pretty much every other oil painting video. Well, here I just had to let that dry. You can see I wiped some of it away here. Well, these other ones that I painted, I basically went from here to this. And I found actually that starting with this darker primer here, not such a bad idea. So I went back, actually reprimed all of the figures. And this is what the Badger Steiner was. Now you can see obviously nowhere near as glossy. But it was a mix of the Ebony Steino Res, which is sort of a dark brown, and a little bit of the black. 3-to-1 maybe, brown to black. So it gives me a little bit of color here. It's not entirely black. But I'm going to start with this, and we're going to see if I get the same results that I got from this. Now, it is a little bit different approach necessarily, maybe, than when we start out with the overall wash, but something told me that this could, save time, and I also didn't have to get quite so messy with wiping away the paints with those sponges. So it's not like I would never do the other thing again. It's just I wanted to try this and see, after the experimenting with this, I want to try it on these guys too. We'll see what happens. It may not work the way I think it does. Maybe it'll work even better than starting from this. We're going to find out. Now, as always, we are using, here it is. All right, I'm so glad I have this smaller container. I actually got this for Adepticon. So Speedball is the name. Mona Lisa is the game. So this is sort of the sub-brand within Speedball. So a friend of mine, he did find some. It's Holbein. Has a nice quality paint thinner, that odorless paint thinner like this. It's not the only kind that's out there. There are other ones. Just make sure they're of a decent quality. Now, another thing we are going to talk about is the palette real quick here. So you've seen me, I think, on some of the more recent oil painting videos do this. Now, this was the one that I was using in the course of painting this test guy right here. So this is, what would you say, 24, about 30 some odd hours ago. So see the straight up oil paint there, that is still active. Now I'm going to assume that, yeah, so these smaller piles are pretty much, those are, well, that's a little bit, okay. So even after 24 hours, there's a little activity there. And if we take some of our white spirits, you can see we can reactivate that a little bit. Look at that. Okay. This is about what you would get from Mig Ammo oil brushers. And you say, so Jim, what's the deal with this palette right here? It's a piece of scrap cardboard, and I just did a what was that, the glue stick right here, and it's the same parchment paper that I use for the wet palettes. Same stuff. It's just kind of a nice, actually cooking parchment paper. And you can see the difference between this and the usual acrylic palette. You can see there's just smaller areas of color because oils, less is more. It's not quite such a broad stroke as, say, the acrylics, but yeah, it's okay. You can see we can still do some nice, look at how thin we can get with this. I really enjoyed these, and they're just Winsor Newton paints. But this is kind of the last thing I'll say here before we move on to the actual painting. But I also found these. So these are on Amazon. I believe this was $16 or $18, something like that. It's 6 instead of 10. Now it doesn't include the white, titanium white. It also doesn't include the black, which is kind of a color you just don't want anyway. Ivory black, not really the best oil paint in the world. You could get a separate tube of titanium white, and you got pretty much everything here. You got your red, yellow, blue, you got a green, a brown, you got it all just in these 6 colors. Pretty darn cheap on Amazon, and it's a decent quality paint. And you could probably make, of each of those bottles, you could probably make 3 or maybe 4, almost maybe 4 or 5 of these, depending on how full you go. If you're going all 1 ounce there, you might only get 2 totally full jars. But I don't think you want to go totally full on these jars because you don't want your oil just shooting out all over the place. So some of these are about 2/3 full. Some may be only half full, but we'll put some of these out on the palette here, and we're just going to add as we go because I want you to see what it's like to how these things actually squeeze out of the containers too. So what we are going to do is put those out on our homemade palettes. There is a fresh one right here. Boom. It's sized to the little window. And we are going to paint up this guy. And we're going to do that next. We've got some colors out on the palette, and we're just going to throw down just some initial colors here. So you can see we got the white, cadmium yellow, we got the raw sienna, burnt sienna, cadmium red, that's the quinacridone, purple over there. We've got ourselves a raw umber over here, that's that olive green. We've got phthalo green, Payne's gray over here. And one thing to keep in mind, now again, unlike, say, miniature paints, so phthalo green, these two right here, just pay attention to these over time. These are the most transparent colors right here. Stuff like this, the cadmium, those are going to cover. This is sort of in between. Payne's gray can be a little tweener also. So you'll see these things change. That is one of the things you got to get used to with the oils. The other thing, remember, thick paint sticks over thin and vice versa. First thing we are going to do, and I'm just going to maybe go with I'll just say a standard, we'll just go with a regular flesh tone on this. We'll try and do some different tones, but it's the usual mix that you see. The burnt sienna gives us a red, and the raw sienna gives us a touch of yellow to that. A couple of ways we can start to cool this down, tone it down. One, Payne's gray. You can see that gives a little bit of a grayishness to it, like that. Or we could take, that's that olive green. We could even take some of the burnt umber, but you see how that just gives it a little bit of a different look. Let's get some more red in there. And let's just start to put this in place. Now, of course, he's wearing pants, so won't necessarily see that. And here, this is, what are we doing here? We're trying to actually take advantage of that darker primer color. So this already is similar to what I did on that test figure that I showed you earlier. And it's a pretty gentle stroke here. Fairly gentle. I'm not going to really worry about lines that much either, but it's a little bit different than say, the lighter primer that you see. But this was something that I did. Now here also too, this is relatively thin paint because, well, we've pretty much gone darn near 50-50, I would say. And that's your white spirits to oils. Now remember, we're doing the jungle basing, so probably any reflected light is going to be in the brownish range. So let's do something like here, the olive green. We're just going to throw some of that here. Now, just keep in mind how thick these layers are, because, well, when you go and do your next layer, they have to be thinner than this if they're going to stick. Because that was, as I was testing these out, that was definitely something that I realized, or, well, was reminded of, even with having that darker layer over the top. Now, I could do some gold armor on this, but I think I'm just gonna stick with the usual kind of sky. That means I'm gonna probably throw some blues out here too. Maybe some just ultramarine blue, probably. Where is my ultramarine? That's ultramarine violet. There we go. So ultramarine blue, and we will just deposit that over here. Now, you always want to give these things a decent shake. So hear that? Hear that sound? Those are agitators in there. And remember, our agitators were actually just pieces of sprue. This is from Reaper Miniatures. It's their weapons sprue here. Look at that. That's at least 4 really good sized agitators for anything. I mean, yes, and also pewter it's not going to rust or anything like that. So it's kind of the ideal thing to shove in a container of paint. Why not? Where are we at here? Now, I also have my lights changed here, as always now, it seems. So for me, this is, there may be coming a time where I have to turn my lights on to see what the heck I'm doing. But boy, it gives you a really nice, decent picture of what's going on here. Now oh yeah, there's a couple of skin areas here we're going to do. Now, keep in mind, too, that this is also what subsequent layers are going to adhere to. I'm going to just a touch of white in there. So see it right away. The skin color and our metal color, they mix together. We've got ourselves a nice, yeah, you can see the blue. You can see the blue there. So I'll try and stick with this. Yeah, I'm going to go gold on that. But I'll try and stick with this light setup for as long as I can, because it is really advantageous for you guys. Okay, what's going on? Yeah, I was tempted to do gold on these, but then I thought, well, maybe, who knows, in the foliage, look at this. It's blending together with the brown that's already there. It just, oh boy, it is so relaxing. See if we can get a little bit more of a regular blue, but if we want a sky blue, here's a little bit of phthalo green, makes it a touch more towards the cyan. I see my brushes kind of going into filbert mode, that's always cool. We like that. But you can see we're not going berserk with the paint here, not throwing down a ton. You just don't need to do that with oils. It's an economy of force here. You don't need so much oil as you might with acrylics. That's another reason why I like the oils, actually, is I need a whole lot less paint. I can do so much more with so much less. I mean, and I'm just enjoying the blends here. If I don't go back to acrylics again, don't get mad at me. I that's not a threat or anything like that, but oh my goodness, this is just it's so mellow and relaxing. It is that proverbial hot bath with the bubbles and the glass of wine or tequila or gin or whatever it is that beverage you prefer, and when you're doing your tub stuff. But man, it is so relaxing. I'm gonna take a little bit more of this here. And it flows onto there so easy. Now, there's not a whole lot of water effects that are going to happen in here. I'm also not going to put any paint down in there. I'm just going to use the Luke's APS foliage stuff down there. So this way, I don't have to stop and wait for oils to dry or anything crazy like that. I could just go boom right in there. What I was thinking of doing though is instead of, since I've had to paint these already for the Table War Charities thing and do a lot of green stuff, we're going to change this. We're going to do red ish, maybe with some other colors too, just because I want all that jungle foliage, right? And I think it could be a fun little contrast here, maybe to have some red accents on these guys. And this is your cadmium red deep, and yeah, this is from that starter set. Actually, you could get it in that set that I showed you at the start there in the materials and planning section of the program. Oh heck, I'm just gonna throw some of that on there too. Painted a whole bunch of brown. Why not throw a little bit of red into here? Bum bum bum. Yeah. And all I'm just trying to do is mark some things down. Now, I'm gonna go with, there's a little bit of your olive. And look what happens when we throw the cadmium yellow in there. So it's another type of sort of an olive green. It's like a brownish green. And what we're going to do is pop that in here real quick. We'll maybe do a relatively simple design of some kind of scales on there too. But look at this. I can let that mix right into my reds. It's so fun to just let things mix together. Let's try and get a little bit more, some lighter action on our skulls. Remember, we don't want those to be white, that bleach bone, because it's sort of a jungle atmosphere, right? We want those to almost, I don't want, well, technically they should be almost black. That's really what should be happening, but we'll just go with there. Oh, look, there's another one that snuck over here too. Look at that. You can see how we got that nice filbert edge on the brush. Nice little filbert edge there. And you could just, one of these little chamois right here. So, here's a piece of it here. So, I always have little leftover chunks like this when I cut out my wet palettes, and so I can always just have that right there, and see it gets a little bit of the paint out there. I would normally use a paper towel, but those are in shorter supply these days, so I'm going with the chamois. All right, here's something that's even a little bit more along the lines of I would say almost like a maggot white type of color. Throw that over here, but look at how that can just sort of blend in with what's already there. I can use my finger. I could use, remember, I can always grab another brush, use that too. So many fun options that are available. Let's get a little more pizzazz into that. Now I also have, this is, if you're looking, say, what would you use if you had an oil brusher type of a color? I would say that one teal color that I really like so much. I can't quite remember what it's called right now. But just look back at some of the oil brusher videos and it should all be right there. Like I said, I try to do as many different things as I can for you, not always the same. And I think this could be really fun for some people. It's a different approach to it, just a darker primer straight away instead of that prime it lighter and then still have to do the wash over the top. It is less messy, I'll tell you that, because you can get some spatter going on when you do it that other way. So I can understand that. You can see that I end up starting out a little bit darker, say, than if this was done with the other approach where the primer is lighter and we do that initial glaze. When I hit that, see that could be interesting as gold. I don't know. I can still change my mind. This is oils. I can still change my mind anytime I darn well please. And that's what I'm gonna say. I'm sticking to that. But just this ability to enjoy the blending that almost sort of happens by itself. Okay, like here on these skulls. Got again the filbert brush working, but as always, every time I do one of these, I pick up more of the paint that's here because that paint is still wet. So as I do this, that color there is not as it's going to be not as light just by virtue of it's picking up what's already sitting there. It's not any kind of a big deal. Just being aware of it, you can actually count on it and you use it to your favor, and that's really cool. See, there is no such thing as dry brush in oils, but there is such a thing as a nice feathered brush stroke like that. Yeah, that is definitely something you can't do with oils. The dry brush not going to happen with the oils, sadly. Even the well, think of this more like the damp brushing that we like to do with our acrylics. Now we are going to get ourselves a bit of almost like an orange here. Oh, it is simple burnt sienna. Some of our cadmium yellow. I'm just gonna think of this as just a sort of mapping out the colors. It's none of this is final. It will all be different, but I really didn't even think of the red until I looked at this crest here and I went, you know what? If I painted it in green twice, we're painting it something different this time. Painting it something different. And we'll work our way, like I said, around some of these things. And do I want that to be gold? Do I not? I've got to figure that out. We can maybe get a little bit more of our cadmium yellow in here too. Now, originally, I was going to do multiple color test figures, but when I did this little test on that podcast that I was recording, I said, I think I want to see this start to finish on one just for the heck of it, as a test of this new different type of priming aspect here. And especially since I had so much success painting just that one figure. Yeah, I had the other one. I sort of threw some paint on that, but that was more so because the podcast ran long enough that I needed to throw paint on something else. So that was yeah. I think we're on to something here with this. Again? It's a slightly different approach maybe than what you've seen with the oils already. But it's not that big a deal because, well, we kind of have to keep in that learning mode, that mode of experimentation, because I have not done oils anywhere near as long as acrylics, so it's just bound to require some more testing. So here we got the lighter oils now. This is probably one of my last, as far as using the original thickness of paint, it's probably the last layer I can do. From here, most likely, I'm going to need to start thinning this down because what will happen is I'm going to go to put it on her. Doesn't matter how soft the brush stroke is, it's just going to wipe away what was there. And that's not super helpful. Not super helpful at all. Again, a little, yeah, so we'll go in here. What have we over here too? I'm trying to hunt down some of those areas of, maybe throw just a couple hints of that onto his, whatever that is, his snake cloth there. I'm going to throw a little bit of yellow down there too. just a touch. We've got our greenish color over here. Let's see what we can do with their skulls. And what you do is with the oils, remember, it's you work with it in an area and then just give that area a bit of a break. You say, you know what, we've done enough. Actually, I like this darker skin tone. I say we're going to do a darker skin tone. So I'm actually going into the raw umber over here with some of my lighter color. What the heck, why not? Let's make a quick change. Let's do that. And so we're getting a slightly, it's not just a lighter brown. This one's almost, that the one underneath has actually got a little more of a reddish tone to it. This is actually a little bit more of a, geez, almost a greenish tone in comparison. Now he does have scarring on his face over there. That's something that I learned when I was painting the Splintered Fang for that charity. Again, that was the Table Wars charity auction at the time of this filming. There's either 2 or 3 weeks left. There might be a month left, but there's a few weeks left in it, I would say for sure. So, and it benefits autism charity, I believe that's what it's for. But we're gonna go back to, yeah, we're just mixing, letting some of these colors mix together ever so gently. But you can see we're starting to build up some, not so much, say, lights and darks and that classic sense of how stark they are, but we've got our colors in place for sure. Here, let's do, so mixing the white and the umber together, it's going to give me a gray, but I'm going to throw ever so slight of a touch of that, more of a pinkish tone in there. I guess the other thing too is once you start thinning down the paints, that's also going to cut down on the drying time. So you saw why on the one figure where I touched it and it was still actually tacky. Now again, it's only been a day plus. So that's not a huge surprise for oil paint by any stretch of the imagination. And remember, we can still glaze. We can glaze wet oils over wet oils. If I feel like I need some dark in the area here, it's not like I have to wait for it to dry and do that. It can still be done. No problem. I am going to take a little bit of the red, a little bit of the cadmium yellow. So that's basically cad red deep, cad yellow medium. And you see we get a little lighter red there. Not a final highlight, just making it a little bit lighter. And I think that'll be interesting with some kind of reddish tone to the cloth. It'll be a nice contrast to all the greens in the foliage, I think. So we will stick with that. Also going to reflect a little bit of that onto our metals right there. You can see I don't do a whole lot of cleaning of the brush. I just grab a different brush, but I can wipe some more of it out as well. So there's our blue, a little bit of our phthalo green in there, and so that's again a little bit more of a turquoise type color. It's gonna be a higher saturation especially because of the phthalo green that worked its way in there. And then back into our sword blade there, give it a bit more of a sky blue color. Same with the armor. Just trying to keep in mind areas pointing towards the ground. Well, you kind of want those to be a ground color, which basically means almost this entire part of his leg over there. So we'll don't mess with that too much. There's a bit more over here. get just some reflected light, say on the few different edges of this blade here for fun. We can go and look at how much lighter we can go. I mean that's essentially our highlight. That look at how far we can go with that still. And of course, oil paints, they are the ultimate wet palette because they just stay wet on your palette. You could use like a paper towel, I guess it, or a sponge or something. If you're really obsessed about, say, sucking up all the extra oil, maybe, well, you do something like that. You grab yourself a sponge, you put your paint out on a sponge or a piece of paper. I could have put it right out on the piece of cardboard. Uh, Maybe for me, I would do that. It would be tougher for you to see. That's I wanted that different color background for you of the more neutral palette there, as opposed to something that has a little bit more of a color to it, like the cardboard. So at that point, we'll call that our initial placement of colors. Next thing we're gonna do is get a little bit more targeted here with some lights. Maybe even do some glazing too. Actually, I might start doing maybe a couple of darker glazes in this next segment as well, and we'll get right back with that. Let's start to work in some lighter colors here. Now, we also have to work a little bit thinner. Gonna go a little bit thinner here, so let's get some of that kind of cadmium yellow, cadmium red. I will throw just a touch of titanium white in there. Also adds just one lower level of opacity. So this is actually now a thinner, and you can see how that's not just lighter, but it's also gonna also stick there. I gotta tell you right now, it's more of a feel. I can't say, well, if you do exactly this portion of this to this, you'll get this. Every paint is different. And let's say you use something that's not the Winsor Newtons. Let's say you use a Liquitex or a Holbein or something else, you might get an entirely different result. And that's okay, because I mean, heck, people get different results. They can both use creature caster paints and get totally different results. Now, the other thing too is if I don't like what's happening with the small brush, I can always just go back to my big brush. It's neither here nor there. They're both pretty much doing the same thing. I'm going to go back in, just get some, there we go. I'm just going to get some lighter, I'm making a lighter yellow over here that I can get to with some of my, mix into my reds here, and looking to get a few of these onto the head crest here. Just remembering that even with the paint this wet, I could still, if I wanted to, do some darker glazes in there. It does require a different approach. Remember, we'd have to do it more on thinking of that capillary action. So you just sort of set the brush there and you let the paint do the rest. You just let that paint do the rest of it for you. I'll throw a little bit of reds into my slight touch of reflection there. Why not? Let's do that. I'm just looking around here to make sure. Okay, there's some more of the reds over there. Let's do some things on the face here. We're gonna grab a little bit of that olive It's the olive green there. He's actually got some pointy ears on him there. But it was thinned down a little bit just to guarantee us some adhesion there. So you can see we throw a little bit of the, I almost called it medium. It kind of is, actually. But that's your odorless paint thinner there. You see it starts to make a little bit of a bit of a highlight on his face. I'm going to throw a little bit of my yellow in there. I don't want it to get too green. Don't want that getting too green too fast. Sorry, I've done a lot of talking today, so my voice might be a little bit just kind of messed up, so I apologize for that. Oh, let's do this to get some of these skulls lighter here. And I think these are probably the GW skulls. Yeah, off the plastic sprue, if I remember right. I'm trying to think back to our basing episode. Now here, let's say we want to do some kind of greenish color for the toxic poisons, like they've taken some kind of snake poison and stuck it in some jars. See if we can make that lighter here in a few spots. Again, just letting that do some mixing on its own. Now this is where it gets a little bit different. So instead of the traditional, say, layering of lighter, 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 well here, in some ways with the oils, you take a different approach. Yeah, that's our light along the edge, but what we're also going to do, so I'm going to throw some stuff right here. Just got those couple of plops of color, right? What are we going to do? We're going to go after the edge of those. We're going to blend those out. So just you clean off the brush. And then those are worked into, so the original line is still there. However, now it's just blended. And you can do that with the larger brushes too. This, I would say, is it's a smaller figure, so hence we're kind of doing it with some smaller brushes. So here, in some ways, I don't want to say you jump layers or whatever, but it does, you want to not have endless layers of oil paint on there. I guess is where I'm going with this. You're going to want to say, you know what, okay, here's a much lighter color, boom, and then blend it into your, say, your middle tones and such, because that's, you don't have to with oils. I mean, the whole point of using them is to be able to blend them. So why sit there with endless layers of lighter, progressively lighter colors? It makes no sense. You're not taking advantage at all of the oils. So just put something there and blend it. So something like this. So there's some titanium white there. It's just gonna go right in there. And then we'll just blend it out here. Let's grab ourselves another blending brush right here. And it's how nice and soft that gets. We'll do something here. We're going to take some of this phthalo green. I think you can see, yeah. So I'm just going to, oh, nice blob of it right there. Psst, I almost cleaned out this brush thinking, oh my gosh, I don't want that to dry in the brush. It's not going to dry in the brush. It's oils. That's what the oils is for. So we've got our stuff positioned on this sword blade. And what are we going to do? We are going to just blend that out real nice. We're going to go on the other side. Maybe some Payne's gray with our olive green. And I think you can see where this is gonna, what this is leading to. Boom, right in there. Yeah. How's about right there? And I can just be chill. I can set down my brush. Don't have to worry about cleaning it. Now we are going to blend over here. And then we're going to blend over here. And by blending, it's not just blend. We're pulling that color out. I mean, look at that. It just like you plop the color there, you move it on either side, and it's done. Boom, that's it. Over. No big deal. No fuss. That's really nice. The ability to do that. I've missed that. I really have. Just with all of the craziness and mayhem here, have not been able to work with the oils, and well, now we're going to be doing that. We are going to be doing that now. So let us do similar things over here. So you can see, unlike, say, some of the, look at, we're just quite literally blobs of color here. And I don't have to worry about these things drying on here. I'm just going to position a bunch of them. I'm going to drop a whole bunch of big old blobs of this lighter sort of turquoise color. Let's go even more with the, bam, more, even more. Let's do it. Let's get that turquoise. Bam, right there. Aha. I just forgot which sword that I just worked on. Yes, I can just put a whole bunch of them out here. Maybe not that thick of titanium white mix, but oh yeah, what the heck? We'll go for it. Let's go for it. So we got a whole bunch of lighter colors positioned, and now we've got, yes, this is our blending brush here. So right here on the chest armor, we do a little bit of blending, but only do a little bit, then clean off that brush, because otherwise you can get all excited. Next thing you know, you got yourself some mud, and you don't want the mud. I think you can see what we're after here. So this, look at just a big old blob of nothing, which suddenly becomes a nice transition into a really nifty transit, almost like it's airbrushed or something. Now I want to, so we're gonna add a couple of things here. We're gonna go at a dark area on this here. And I like this, but I want to have that be more raw sienna. Right in there. So let's now, just gonna throw a little white. That's better. Needed to be, that needed to be lighter. So we've positioned our colors there, and now how's about a bit of blending? I can't get enough of it. It's really fun. It really is fun. This is another area where it's just kind of handy to have a bunch of these, the cheaper craft brushes and such, because now I can grab, oh, it's a different brush here, and I am going to, you know how much I love my magentas and my sword blades and pinks. Well, there's your, it's sort of an alizarin crimson. It's a little bit more of a purple tone to it. That is gonna go, that's gonna go here. We're gonna go back to Mr. Blending Brush. And then we're gonna blend that together. So it's a yet another little color that we've added to our sword blade. I think that's very fun. Even going to work in a few. That's quite literally pink. I'm just throwing a few little shots of that on the skin tone here, and then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to blend that. I'm going to blend that into my skin tone so you don't really. It's tinted the color a little bit. So remember I was talking about those glazes and such. Well, this is even another way of maybe tinting some of your colors. People won't even know what you've done it. Now we've got our blob of teal over here, which now suddenly goes from a blob to a nicely blended color. So again, that why struggle with endless layers of lighter, lighter, lighter when you could just kind of slap some colors on there and push them around. Yet another caveat here, and this is from a person who had to learn it the hard way himself when he was just a young lad and first playing around with oils, is that, well, you're that whole pushing around of paint sort of thing, that's something, well, you learn the hard way when it's too much, when it's not enough. I know that's not the most fun thing to hear, that, well, yeah, you're kind of on your own, you're going to have to learn it by yourself, but well, didn't you already sort of learn an awful lot about miniature painting, at least the initial parts of it, yourself, right? You we're all sort of self-taught to some degree anyways. I'm trying to get a little, there we go. Okay. Just looking to get a little bit of that underlighting there. Okay, we're gonna go back into this fun little teal color again here, because I really do like it. I really like it. We shall lighten that up as it works its way out here. And even just get a little bit of an edge on that sword. Where's my blending brush here? And you'll see what happens. It's going to be right there between your lighter color and your teal. I tell you, you get spoiled. You will not believe how fast you get spoiled when you can do stuff like that, or just any of these type of things here, and then you go back to acrylics and you go, oh yeah, can't do that. I mean, you sort of can. There are some drying retarder type things. I've used them. I think I might have even used them more back in the original painting pyramid video days. And they sort of keep things from drying, but they also add some other weird elements to your painting that's not always so welcome. And I ended up getting away from those. Well, it's, oh, what would you rather? They say, would you rather have the water-based oils or something like that? Well, yeah, that's kind of what acrylics are basically. You want water-based oils, use acrylics with drying retarder. Boom, you got water-based oils basically. But I want oils. I want the actual real deal. So yeah, look at that. Having some fun here with some metal. I mean, think of it as you're getting a little bit of a non-metallic metal in oils mini tutorial here. I think that's why I grabbed this one, because he had a lot of different little daggers and swords and such, and I thought that might be fun for you to see also. And we're focusing in on that a little bit here, but we'll get to other things too. So here's some more. Look, let's just throw some of that right on there. We'll grab our blending brush. Now, eventually you may need another blending brush because the brush you've been using starts to pick up an awful lot of paint on it. So see, there we go. Let's let's do something that's maybe a little lighter even. How's about there and there and here? And I'm going to get some lighter tones over here. And back to Mr. Blending Brush. To do the same here. Just see how I'm marching that up. I'm not taking the entire color that I put there and just swirling it around. I'm pulling at the edge. It's almost like you're doing the tablecloth trick, right? And you just grab one edge of the tablecloth and you yank it off the table. Well, it's kind of what I'm doing here. Is I'm just taking one little portion of that blob of color and just sort of virtually yanking it off of the off the surface. I know it's a crazy analogy, but in some ways it's a little bit true. Now I think I have, aha, I have my cadmium yellow light. So I'll put that out there. And yes, I apologize for the font maybe being on the larger side. I'm just going to throw that over here for right now. And you can see that's got a very different look to it. We're going to use this in some gold highlights here. This is what will close out this segment here. And I think then the next one, maybe we start to focus in on throwing in a few of those dark glazes that I was telling you about, those panel line washes that I know you've heard me talk about in previous episodes. Maybe whatever other details, stuff like this here in this snake skin or whatever that is supposed to be. So we'll do some of that too, but you can see for now, starting to work in some lighter colors here on our golds. It's a different mentality here, and I wish I could come up with some really sweet, one or two word tagline for it that's different than, say, the approach to acrylics. But you have to be a little bit more. You have to plan ahead even more, because sometimes you go from the end or from the beginning to the end fast. And your middle tone is not necessarily something you paint on, it's something that you blend. Ooh, now that's a t-shirt worthy phrase. I think that is definitely t-shirt worthy. Of course, I'll forget it. I don't remember what I just said. Oh yeah, middle tone is something you blend, not something you paint. So maybe think of it that way, because we really didn't we, start with darker stuff that you would consider more of a shadow. And then we sort of went directly to blam, highlights, and then we blended to middle tones. It's not quite that simplistic, but I think maybe that gives you a little something to, something to consider, something to compare it to, I suppose. All right, we got those. Get some of these here. I think we can go even lighter here. Now, of course, inevitably there's going to be some shininess that happens because it's oil paint. Now, if you want to maybe reduce that a little bit, that's where you move on to the next figure or the next project or whatever, and you don't necessarily let this dry completely, but what you do is you just let it sort of chill. You let that paint settle down, and believe it or not, it gets a little less shiny. it's a little bit easier to put your next layer on there. That's why I strongly advise people that are maybe doing their first oil painting or whatever, I would say find simpler things, cloaks, large surfaces, broad surfaces, and think along those lines. Now, there, I just had a thing where the paint just bashed right into that skull where it wasn't supposed to, and I took 2 seconds with my blending brush, and tragedy completely averted. But even the blending stuff that you see me do, sometimes positioning the paint, letting it sit there, even as little as 5 minutes, but even longer, you'd be, I think, surprised at the interesting results that's going to give you. So I think we're good to go here. What we are going to do then, maybe throw some darker glazes on this and start to do things, the eyes, maybe a couple of more things that we would consider details. And we'll get to that next. So we're back and we're going to try and do some of those pin line washes, glazes, all kind of the same thing. Now this was handy. So this was actually a larger jar than I had thought I had ordered for the making the oils in the oil brushers, but it actually is a really convenient container for the white spirits because now I can just kind of go boom and put some of that in there instead of trying to pour it out into a small container like that because you really don't need a whole bunch of the white spirits. And now I've got some cleaner and you can see it too. So it's a little bit more on camera for you. Now let's see if we can't do some glazing here, and that's where these guys are going to come in handy. So we're going to push you over there, and then so begins this. Now I could even a couple things. I could use that little jar over there, or remember these guys from the old days. Just take some of that and a couple of drops here, and let's see what we get. Look at that. Nice and liquid there. Gonna flow really well. Then we'll do some that's maybe a little less, somewhere halfway in between. And boy, in comparison, my homemade oil brusher stuff seems darn near thick by comparison, which is really, that's really interesting. Now, too, it has been on the palette for a while, and while it's not dry, some of the oil is definitely going to be absorbed into the parchment paper and such. So I think you can see what just happened there. Watch. Oh, let's do that to our green over here. Let's do that to this basically sort of an olive drab. I want to say sap green. That's the old. Oh boy, that goes back a long way. I remember the sap green that I always, as a kid, I wanted that, and I was always stuck with something else that, well, was some lesser alternative for various reasons. I always wanted that sap green. Now we're gonna take some of that, and then we're gonna just go zoink like that. And you saw we're not really pushing it around. We drop it there into a low point. Now, if it doesn't flow very easily, then that means you want to make it a little bit more liquid. Now, what might freak people out a little bit is that, though it's obviously going to look kind of on the glossy side, it's going to look really wet. Well, I mean, even a regular acrylic glaze is going to do the same thing. But see how I'm just touching that into those areas, and look what it leaves behind. It really gets us some nice, rich darks. And that's over wet oil paint. That is not dry or anything like that. That's if you start doing too much of this, you will have a negative impact on it. So it's just something to be aware of, something to keep in mind. Now we're going to do that elsewhere here. We are going to drop some of that into this belt buckle here, but again, it's less about doing a brush stroke and more just touch the brush there and let the liquid do the work instead of you pushing it around. You will be glad you did. Glad indeed. See, like even in there, this actually makes me very envious because when I try and do that, what I just did here to get that sink down into that little with the standard acrylic glaze, well, it doesn't want to do that, which is just it's hilarious in some ways. And he's actually missing an eye here, so we're gonna have to do some kind of interesting magenta purple something there. And now what I'm gonna do is just yeah, this is really thin down, so that's why it's gonna stick there relatively well, but we are going to take some of that, essentially in a alizarin crimson type color. We are going to mix that here with our Payne's Gray, as you do. I'll get this where you can see it, and you can see where it's a bit of a, it's another one of those semi glazes right there, but now let's do something with this where we actually do sort of spread it out into the general area of paint over there. So you can do that intentionally, but what would you say, the main thing, it is intentional. You're looking to actually blend it instead of just, well, I kind of muddied it up and now I'll push it around. No, that was intended. Just like here, I'm intending actually for that. See how that got darker and now that gold end of the sword hilt showed up? We'll do something like that here too. And then we'll also hit this area right here. Again, this will be a thing where you have to train yourself. You have to your mind has to think, just like with the thickness level of paints, just like with the transparency level of paints, it's going to be different from one to the next. This is a thing where you just have to say, you know what, I've just got to touch it there and let that glaze do the work for me. Let it move around. Let it do the stuff. I can't push that around. You just have to kind of deny that urge to sit there and push it around. You'll be glad that you did. Like I said before. See, look at this. Even here, I think it'll show up. I think, yeah. See how that is like a very traditional, pretty darn close to a traditional style of glaze. Just that I have to be aware. Just touch it there and leave it, and not go back in. I can go back in later on or whatever. Now here we've got what in some ways actually looks like stitching, which is interesting because we've treated this sort of as metal, but I guess you could have something like this holding metal together. So we'll do some of that, and what we'll do is let some of this Payne's Gray work its way here, and then there's nothing that says we can't go back also later. We are going to take, here's some of our raw umber mixed in there. Makes it even a little bit darker. And just see, look at that. We're just kind of picking up an edge there. We've got some edges here we'd like to refine. So this is right in between. Look at that. That's wet oil paint over the top of wet oil paint. It can be done. We just did it. Now we are going to take, actually going to take some of this. We're going to make ourselves another dark glaze. We're going to do the head crust, maybe, I think, with a bit of a darker glaze here. We're going to use the we're going to rely on that quinacridone to darken this and keep it in the family of red too. Maybe a touch more. Oh yeah, let's get just a little bit more in there. So again, if you want to maybe have a little less strain and stress on your brush, maybe I just take the pipette and drop that in next time. But look at what that does. So instead of continuing just to add lighter colors, remember, same principle as if this was done in acrylics. If adding lighter colors doesn't really seem to get you anywhere as far as your value scale, go the opposite. Add some dark. And that's what we're going to do here. That's what we're going to do. And straight away, it makes a big, big, big difference. And I'm actually going to let that reflect over there. Going to let that work its way into here too. And I think you'll see the difference when we flip that over. Big difference. And that's not to say we can't go in there and add a lighter red highlight too, but this is also what I mean about, oh gosh, I want to say circumventing or shortcutting or whatever, but it is one of the ways that oils saves time. Because people say, well, okay, why do oils save you time if you can't necessarily blend everything? This is one of those ways because you can still do things like these sort of traditional glazes, but you get the things that acrylics can't do, like the blending. So it's that best of both worlds kind of thing. It's more than just one aspect, I guess is where I'm going with that. I'm gonna throw in some darks here and even here too, so you can see how easily that adheres because it's nice and thin. So we're even going to do a little bit of a line there. We are going to do some glazes on the skin too here on the hands, his arm. Look at how that sticks. Look at how that stays in place. But we have to be, see, I already, just that, even that little bit, I picked up some of that lighter color. Just, it is something that you have to be aware of. But as long as you keep it in mind, well, then you should be just fine. You should be just fine. Now we're gonna, this to me was too light of a red. I'm gonna make it darker with a glaze. And yes, I can do that. I just glazed. I just knocked that down, made a completely different red because that was just, I don't know. Maybe this doesn't get quite as dark, but we're still going to darken it down. Again, look at that. We touch it there. It just goes right down into those recesses. We do the same thing here. We'll continue that here. In some ways, this is, as much as I love the blending stuff, this is kind of a favorite thing. The ability to do something like this. And see, look at this here. See how it starts to blend in a little bit, but not completely. That's an element of control that's just gonna happen through experience. I know because I had to do that myself. I didn't just magically start doing that. So when I started doing oils, I thought that was impossible. I did not think you could do something like that. That was my introduction to oils. Was, well, you can't do that. It has to all be about the wet blending and essentially that more traditional view of what oil paints can do. And the more I pushed the material, the more I realized, there is so much more this can do. So see, that's where I'm actually letting some of the original color blend in with my glaze there. It's toning that down ever so slightly. Now, I know I've mentioned this before, but we'll review it again here. When you do thin this down so much to the point where you got, oh my gosh, probably potentially as much as 90% or more, maybe even 95% thinner in their white spirits, that means it's going to dry faster. This is why I can see a miniature almost being dry after a 24-hour period. Because in effect, we're sort of almost treating it like it is a standard glaze, right? We're removing that much more of the oil. I mean, look at this. That's almost entirely white spirits there, and then we just drop that in there, and it gives us a little bit of, like here, this needs to have, so it leaves behind some of the other shading there, but it's not always. See, I can put a little yellow in there. Oh, I'm gonna go back to my umber. So it doesn't have to be a really dark color that's a glaze either, or a pin line wash. So this is the opposite way. We're going a little bit opposite here, and we are gonna apply that here. If I can make it where I can not touch the rest of the figure, that will be a challenge for you. Is to work this so that you're not having collisions with the rest of your figure. I think that I'm going to take some of this here. Kind of see what I can do with it. Yeah, an interesting reflection there. And then here too, even let's go into some of this lighter color here. We're not going to make it quite such a glaze, but we're going to thin it down. We're going to thin that down. Looks like it's in place. Look at how we can pick out, again, that's wet oil paint. I did not think something like that even was possible. I thought there's no way. I'm going to have to wait for it to dry. And then after it's dry, completely dry, then I can maybe go in and do that, probably with acrylics. And there was a point where I just had to do it in oils. There was no time to wait for anything to dry or screw around. And that's when I discovered, oh, well, yeah, it can be done. I mean, look at that. Look at that fine edge there. We're going to do that over here too. So it can be done. And see how we can bring out a few of these lighter edges, just as if it was acrylics. It is definitely possible. You're seeing it happen. How's about some more orange here? Now the other thing too with these oil demos is and that's not going to quite have that clean separation of, we're going to work on the face, and now we're going to work on the freehand, and we're going to work on this next. It's not going to be that way with the oils. You can see just the pattern of working is different. Sometimes we're going into fairly bright highlights at a fairly early stage, earlier than most likely would happen, say, with acrylics. It's a different medium. It calls for sometimes different approaches, different methods. Look at how that just brings out. We had very little separation there at the start of this segment, and now healthy amount of separation between those two edges. there was very little shape right here, and we went from very little shape to a whole lot more. Now we will go in the opposite direction. We'll go back with our Payne's gray here, and we're going to institute some darks. And here I'm actually physically blending that. I allowed that to the brush to, in all effect, to get dirty. Let's do ourselves a bit of a horizon line on that piece. We are going to do some darks here, almost a little bit like we're thinking of a tree line, maybe, perhaps, and then we are going to go over here to a bit of a turquoise type of thing. Now I thought I could have sworn I had cobalt blue. That might be, well, might be a color I have to get, because guess what? That's not one of the cheaper ones. That has cobalt blue. Any of those things that have a distinct name like that, they're gonna have a bit more of a price tag on them. And those are things that you essentially get as more of a luxury item later. So see what we did right there? These are those typical kind of metallic features, right? Those striations. Here, let's go even brighter here if we can. Looks like I've got it where you can see it. There we are. And now play with this a little bit here. We're going to get ourselves again another bit of reflected light here. I think we need a bit of action here on this dagger. We developed the swords a whole bunch, but now we're going to do some things on this dagger here. And then what we're going to do is, again, instead of a very neat and tidy, well, we finish up all the metallic things here, or finish all of this, or the whatever, it's going to still be some more, basically what I'm doing now, but in a few more areas. Obviously, the last segment, we'll fool around with some water in the base, and we're going to keep it real simple. I'm going to try and use the Green Stuff World UV water, along with maybe some other water effects type thing, but for sure we're definitely going to focus in on the Green Stuff World UV resin, and we'll do a little bit of my new favorite, some of that ground cover stuff from Luke's APS. See what that just a little bit right there, and what that does. To bring out a bit more of that. Yeah, let's get me a blending brush here. That's better. Because what we'll do is we'll develop some more on the skin tones and such here. Well, he only has one eye. Let's see if we can paint that in here. Like so. Some teeth there. So that's what we'll do now. In the next phase here, we're going to continue to develop some more details. Obviously on the face and armor and other such places. So I'll be right back with that next. I'm going to see if we can wrap up the painting phase here. Now let's play around with the face a little bit here. So what we are going to do, we are going to take, and again, some of that's the raw umber there. We are going to take some of our titanium white. We're going to mix that in there. We want to have a few of these different colors on hand here. And let's see just how much lights we can add in this, just the vicinity of his eyes here, around the mouth, the chin, just to bring some of this out. Things like tattoos or markings or whatever, I haven't really thought about that. There might be something that, who knows, maybe after this dries. That's something that we do with the unit afterwards, but this is another one of those more basic elements of, say, the army painting phase, where we have to decide, okay, how much do we want to spend on each figure? How much time do we have to spend? Now, here's where I took some of that magenta color there, or mixing that in, trying to make that look a bit scarred. So something like that. Let's say we want some kind of very stylized snake tattoo that goes on his. He's got his bald head here. There's maybe some room for it. Well, how long does that take? Does that add 10 minutes to every figure? And that's when you start getting into the mathematics of things. Okay, is it worth it, pound for pound, to have some kind of tattoo like that on every figure in the warband? Is it okay to just do one or two, maybe for the start, and then afterwards, when we have more time, you're not rushing around for a tournament or a game or whatever, then maybe you do another round of work on it and you complete that stuff. Maybe you do something like that. And it's something we're talking about in every single army painting series. I suppose that changes a bit in the oil painting versions, because that kind of a thing, you have to sort of wait for things to dry and then go back later. Another thing too is, if you're going to use oils, well, you will have to factor in some drying time. So doing this the night before a tournament, not the best plan. I think you want to give these at least a 24-hour period to dry. And I know the question was asked a couple of times just today, just in a general daily course of me answering questions. And someone asked, well, how long do you wait before you would do something like, say, put the Army Painter anti-shine over the top of this, just to sort of seal it in place and everything like that? That's going to be a feel. There is no, I can't say wait exactly this long. I can say, well, it could take 24 hours. It could take 2 days, 2.5 days. It depends on how thick you made the paint. And what we're going to do is we're going to try and, let's see, what we got here? I think we can do something right here. We're going to darken these, and we'll leave that one in the center a little bit lighter. So we're going to see if we can't darken these some more around the edges here, to just sort of create that pattern of snake scales. It could depend on humidity, because here it's gotten colder again, which means I want that to be actually a little bit more on the greenish side of things here. So we're gonna do something like this. It depends. Like now, the heater has been going on pretty much all day long, which means air is drier here. That can change if it's the middle of summer here. Well, potentially a very different set of circumstances. The air could be much more moist, and while it's going to affect maybe acrylics more, could still have an impact on the oils and the drying time. Now I'm actually going to have some of this green work its way into the face here, believe it or not. It's going to be barely even noticeable. I mean, this is a insanely bright green, and yet, we're going to throw that in our golds, and have some of that here in our metals, because it's what we do. It's what you do. Yeah, throw some of that here as well. Let's make it even more intense. Why not? Make it lighter over here. It's just about with the when you're doing the metallics and that sort of thing, you want to have as many, I don't want to say a rainbow of colors, but you want to get some in there, not just have variations of bluish gray. I think you can see the impact that something like this has. That little bit of, it's just a touch of color to it, something different than just endless things of yellow for gold. Like over here, this is also going to give us some really strong contrast against our reds there because it's now this really, really bright green. Yeah, it's, see, a little bit like that. That, to me, that was helpful. It drew things away from just being gold. I'm going to grab this yellow here and some of my cadmium red for a nice sort of an orange color here. We'll seek out a few highlights in our his little crest. Now, what's weird about these splintered fang is that they have some have head crests like this, and then others actually have basically a cut or like an opening in their helmets for their mohawks. So that's really, talk about bowing to fashion there. That's some intense attention to fashion. That's maybe more of a sacrifice than I would be willing to make to preserve a mohawk, but maybe that's just me. Maybe that's just me being me. I don't know, but I am going to get a little bit of a lighter red here. And it's relatively thin. Again, we've got the thicker layers there already, but it's got to be a little bit thicker than a glaze because that was just the last thing we did. It was a really thin glaze there, so we need it to be somewhat thicker than that. It's all part of that little chess game. All part of that little chess game we're playing there with the oils. We will do that over here too. Now you've seen me use that UV light on a few occasions. I've used it on some of, there was a dark sword figure that we used that on, the one with the lily pads. Now on some of these, we're going to try a few different types of foliage. On this one, I'm going to keep it simple and I'm just going to use Woodland Scenics foliage because I don't really have the time for things to dry and do some other things. What I would like to do is on a few of these, use some of the ferns and jungle foliage from the Wicked Elf range. You remember that stuff? We love that a lot. It's really nice. I've been kind of saving some of that for this particular unit here. So I think that could be really interesting to see that used more on an army as opposed to just a single dark sword figure. All right, there's more of our, again, that lighter tone. We're going to try and get some of these, see, right there on the ends of those. All the while remembering that the paint underneath is wet. In an ideal circumstance, really, this figure, we've moved on to other ones after giving it more time after doing those dark glazes like we did in the last segment. I would ideally prefer to have moved on to a whole nother figure or two or three or four and then come back and done what it is that we're doing right now. That's why I was tempted to do more than one color test figure, but these the mixing of these oil brushers that I sort of made for myself, that it kind of changed the paradigm a bit. Actually, it changed it a lot, and I was actually able to go ahead and do something like that. So I was kind of thrilled that I could keep this more along the lines of the usual. We'll do a color test figure instead of all of a sudden a whole third of the unit has been used up in a color test. Now, I'm going to play with this here. So we're going to take some of this red. Well, I might not like this at all. It might look too much like eyeliner. But so I just added some red there. And I'm going to do a similar thing over here. Just trying to deepen some of the, I got some of those recesses there. And I think we got that pretty well settled. How's about right there too? That needs some. And we're gonna throw a few lighter highlights. I'm trying to avoid having to throw out some more titanium white here. It's maybe not the purest titanium white, but we're gonna run with it. And we'll do a couple of essentially final highlights on some of our golds here. Let's see what we can do with this belt buckle here. That is also, this area needs some more lights. And if it's not sticking, you gotta thin it down. It's one way or the other. It either has to be thinned down or thickened up if it's not gonna stick for you. Generally with the acrylic stuff, if it's not flowing, sometimes you need to get a little bit more water in it. It's kind of the opposite problem. Is it sticking? Is it not sticking? All right, that's set pretty well. And what we are going to get a little there, just a hint of reflected light there. Now we're going to grab some of our lighter skin tone here. So you can see it's almost sort of an olive skin tone. It's not sort of that really deepest Africa type where it almost has a touch of a blueness to it. It actually has more of that sort of, again, the olive green type of look. I don't know why. Sometimes things just work out that way. Sometimes it just works out that way. Here's an area where that was just, I did myself a little bit of a line there. Again, we will get some of this and pick out a few more highlights along this head crest. And I apologize if I sometimes hold my breath a little bit. That's another way of sort of controlling your brush there. And that's more of a cloth type of thing. I don't want to make that look too much like metals with too many bright highlights on it. So there is another case where I'm going to just do this. And I say, you know what, that was just too much. It's too much. We are just gonna knock that down. We're gonna do a little bit of blending of things here. I'm even going to, take some of that red and blend that in there. Now let's see if I'm gonna make the eye a little bit bigger. He only has one of them. I'm gonna let that sit there, and we'll go back and we'll do an iris later, but we have to just let that sit for right now. If I go back in there and mess around with it, it'll turn into an unholy mess, and we don't really need that. But what else I do need is to get some dark here on these scales to make a somewhat of a pattern there. Just real quick, nothing super fancy about it. Oh, here's that green. Okay. But I hope you can see just by looking at this that the palette, there's a difference to it as opposed to what you normally see in some of the acrylic demos. As we add a little more green to the gold there, that you can see we've got less of the massive swirls of color, and it's just much more, well, for lack of a better term, it's much more controlled. It's much tighter. Much tighter than what you have seen on other videos, and that's an okay thing. That's not a big deal. It's, again, different material, requires different things. As I add a little bit of green into here too. That's the fun part. Remember, that is the fun part, is taking so almost like a lime green and putting that right over red. I might also think about lightening some of these scales here a bit on the top edge, almost a bit like a gemstone type of a highlight. And again, it is possible because we do this, we thin down our titanium white so that it will stick. But if you thin it down too much, it's just going to run all over the place. Now, it's not like that couldn't happen to you with acrylic paints too. It could. I've had it happen. With oils, though, more likely, just because, well, you see that one of the reasons why those panel line washes work so well with oils and not acrylics is because of how thin it is. And here, let's get a few elements on this metal here. So we got some more little like rivets and that sort of thing that we want to hit. I am going to take some of the darker red here. Get some separation there too. Now let's see what we can do with this eye. Now I don't know if I'm going to have to deal with some overflow here, but we'll see. All right, so we've got that walled off pretty well. Then we're going to have to find ourselves a good spot to put that iris there. Where might that be? Which way do we want to have him looking is essentially what we're trying to figure out. And also, I've got to think, how thick does this have to be? That's relatively thick compared to what we've been putting there already. And there we go. There's the eye. Bit of an eyebrow over the top of it. And there you go. It can be done with oils. That's maybe a little more on the nerve-wracking side of things, but it can be done nevertheless. And remember, over there we've got the sort of the scar going for his eye. And let's see what we've got here that we can add maybe in terms of some lights. We got this orange over here. I'm gonna get into here. Just gonna see if there we go. I want to get a few lighter tones in here. We don't have very much in the way of lights there. We have plenty over here on this side. So I'm also going to no, I'm gonna go the other direction. So I was about to go more towards the green. I'm actually gonna go more towards a orangey red here. I want to try and lighten this up. Let's see what happens. I'm trying to just get a little more separation. I'm gonna go a little further with that. A little bit further. That's it. There we go. That is what I needed. So I got some green there, I got orange there, I got almost like a red there. So I think that worked out pretty well. And like I said, what I might do is let some of that settle, maybe for half an hour, and then I might take my blending brush and go in there and push that around. Just sort of blend it, give it one last little nice little fade there. It's something though that I have to wait for the paint to actually dry a bit though. I can't just jump in there, leap right in there and do that. I don't even know if you can see what we're adding here, but just that was just kind of all dark right in there. It was hard to see what was happening. But these are the type of things that I can do now the rest of the way here. Just all right, well, here, let's, for the heck of it, we're going to throw a little bit of a green. We're actually using green to highlight the red, basically his red boots or leggings or whatever the heck those are. We'll just do maybe some quick rust over here. Let me. The ideal for that is usually burnt sienna. Here we'll get that nice watery thing there, and boom. A rusty axe now in the water. See how that didn't take very much time? I know it's all glistening and everything else, but it's all good. Yeah, not too shabby there. Gonna go back and see what other small areas maybe we throw a bit more of a light over here. And these are the things now that, how much time do you have? Do you have the time to spend throwing these extra little touches like green highlights over this red blue? Or you just say, you know what, the heck with it. I'm just going to cover that with foliage. I'm going to put a big old tree branch there or something, a tuft of something, so I don't even have to paint that. There's that too. I mean, it's not cheating. Unless you say it's not cheating unless they catch you or something like that, but that's another totally legitimate strategy to getting stuff done on time. See a few extra little darks in here. There on a end of our dagger and such. So we will call this the end of the painting phase, and what we'll do is, as we do the last little bit of this here, we're going to play around with that UV water and some of those other foliage elements, see what works before we get to the rest of the unit as a whole. So we'll be right back with that. So we've got some interesting products here. Now you can see, look at the palette camera, you can see We've got this from Woodland Scenics, fine leaf foliage. We've used this before. Now, what we'll do is we're just gonna pull out. Oh, there's one piece of this here. Okay, we'll go with this big old mass here. So I'm gonna try that. Get the rest out of the way here. And then we've got, this is that pine forest ground cover that I just absolutely love. That is from Luke's APS. And then we're back into our green stuff world. UV resin. Now this is the transparent kind. They also have some fluorescence. I think it's a green for sure. I think there's a red one. There's a few types of this now. But the idea is you put this in place and then you see that UV light right there. That will actually cure this and cure it quickly. Now, first things first though, we want to get some foliage into here. So now I think I'm going to use just some of this type of very watery super glue because it's going to dry fast. And the goal is to get this down into the crevices here, like so. And then I'm going to take some of the fine foil. I won't take the big stuff, but some of the finer stuff, and it's going to drop that down into the recesses. Now, you can see some of that just got on the skull there, which at first I was not happy about, and then I realized, well, yeah, I mean, the vegetation probably would cover those skulls too, so why not? This is a quick way of just getting some color there. Yeah, I might just leave it like that. So there's a few other ones there too. Now, next thing is we let that dry for a little bit. Now I might throw some of that too on here after we get this foliage, but first I'm going to get this out of harm's way. Now you can see these come in little clumps like this. And basically what you've got to do is kind of separate this till you find something that looks manageable like this. And sometimes the clumps are going to break on you just when you think you've got it all set. You can also use a little bit of a scissors here. Like so. And we'll do a little bit of pruning. Now, I'm going to get rid of this too. So what we have is we get rid of some of the last of the stragglers. We have some here that we could actually stick down into our cork. And remember, that cork is pretty smushy, pretty soft. We just need to find a good place for it. And I'm thinking potentially right there is a good place for that to, yes, indeed. What I can do here is take this, stick that down in there, just make myself a little bit of a hole. And I won't really put this down into deep, but the idea is this will now go into that hole that I just made. There's a little bit of a hook on the end of that, and I don't want that there. So let's get a little bit of glue into there. And I'm not going to do this with the tweezers, so it could be somewhat humorous at a certain point. Just bear with me here. Now, which way do I want to orientate this? I think I want to go this way with it. I'm just trying to find out where the heck that hole is, which has promptly disappeared. Not quite sure how that happened. So in that case, I'm just gonna do this again. Okay, we'll say that's where the hole is. And try not to break my little piece of branch. There we go. Ah, that's it. So, a little bit of a jungle foliage tree type of a thing there. We'll just, again, snip off whatever is weakest and not really cooperating. And over there, the other thing we can do is to strengthen that a bit. I'll throw some more super glue there. And I'm going to find another clump here. And that's going to sit right in there. And that's going to give it a little more stability. Resting right there. See my one skull. Look at that. Now he's happily, it's like he's got a hat. He's just peeking out from underneath the foliage there. All right, so I'm going to blow away some of the excess here. And last but not least, try some of our resin here. Now it's another one of those things where you have to try it a few times. I would actually suggest trying it on, maybe not even on a base that you're using. Just try it on something else and get used to the timing of it. All right. Get this where I can have it in the right hand. And I'm going to try and get this where you can see. I think we got this set up pretty well. Now, where's my... I might need that too. So, actually, I'm going to see just how much flow I get. Okay, this stuff, it's relatively thick when it comes out of the container here. And it does have a little bit of a fragrance to it. Okay, so you see how we've got some liquid in place there, and what I'm going to do now is break the tension and move it. Can always throw more in there. Now, this will be easier on some of the larger bases. Definitely be easier on some of the bigger bases. There's not a lot of room to play with here. And I kind of knew that going in. And we'll do one more shot of it right here. Like I said, you don't want to squeeze that thing too hard because there'll just be stuff all over the place. Now we're going to get that far away. I'll put that here. And we're going to hit it with our UV light. And you may not be able to see, there's actually some smoke that's going to come out of this. It's not like it's going to catch on fire or anything like that, but it just, be aware that we'll do that. And you could put it on there as long as you want, but it should just not take that long to set. Let's get some more of our UV res. Now the tree's kind of in the way, but I actually had to hold it at this angle anyway, so that might just work well for you. All right, so there's our water. There's our water, and we're just going to hit that with our UV light here. Needless to say, you don't want to be pointing this in your eyes or on a mirror or at your cat or anything like that. Obviously, not as powerful as sun rays or whatever, but best to just not have that happen. And I think oh my goodness, there's one last little spot of water over here that I've got to try and do somehow. All right, there's my one drop. And hopefully my pin will do the rest, and then we will bake that. There we are. And you will get used to this as you try it more and more. You may need to do a second layer. I'm tempted to do a second layer there, but I won't. Now, the reason I use this instead of some of the other water effects thing is that this won't set. It won't basically collapse, because I've used other stuff, and the next day I've come back and it's shrunk. It's like gone. There's just like a glossy sheen instead of actual water, and that's disappointing. So that is why I sort of like this material for doing these fast little... Here, let's put a little more in here. It's just so much faster. Remember, time Ironically, we're putting a fast drying material on a slow drying paint, but hey, it is what it is. So I'm just going to give that another shot of the UV light there. I'm just kind of keep my hand away from it. So sorry, it's just kind of sitting there on the table without you being able to necessarily see it really well. That's more like it now. How much did this actually set? Okay, yeah. See, I'm trying to move that and I can't. So it's definitely work. It is set. What we're going to do is just finish off our base there. Maybe I throw some more foliage on that as we wait for things to dry here. But just want to say thanks a lot for catching me on this episode here. This is going to be a great series. I know it's been delayed by lots of different things, but as far as I'm concerned, it's really worth the wait because I've made some real breakthroughs with the oils here. I feel like if I had done the other series just as is, it really wouldn't have been so helpful. This, I think, is going to be really helpful. So thanks a lot, guys. I'll catch you on episode 3, where we're going to dive back into our oils. See you then.